So in this video we're going to talk about hindsight bias, and we're going to talk about how hindsight bias can destroy your life. And we're going to highlight this by telling 5 short stories, and then I'll address some questions with regards to hindsight bias. Now remember, this is a mixture of education and entertainment. So with that being said, let's analyze this train of thought accordingly. Story 1. The stock market gamble. So Mark invested heavily in a tech stock after reading about its promising future. A few months later, the stock plummeted due to unforeseen issues. Afterwards, Mark told his friends he had a bad feeling about it all along. Despite showing excitement at first, he believed he knew it would fail, even though he had been confident before the downturn. In hindsight, Mark convinced himself he saw the warning signs, but the truth was, no one could have predicted such an event. This is a classic example of hindsight bias, where the outcome makes the past seem obvious. Story 2. The missed exam question. Now Sarah, she studied hard for a chemistry exam, but she missed a question about molecular structures. When she saw the correct answer afterwards, she exclaimed, "I knew that. How could I have got it wrong?" She felt as though the answer had been clear all along. But in reality, the stress of the test caused her to second guess herself. Once the answer was revealed, it seemed obvious, but at the moment, she hadn't been sure. Her reaction was shaped by hindsight bias, which made her believe she had the knowledge all along. Story 3. The forgotten umbrella. John checked the weather forecast, which predicted a clear and sunny day. Trusting the forecast, he left his umbrella at home. Unfortunately, by noon, a heavy rainstorm arrived, soaking him on his way to work. Later, he thought to himself, "I should have known it would have rained. The air felt damp this morning." John's memory of the morning became altered. It became altered by the outcome, because the rain made it seem like there was obvious clues that he had missed. But in reality, hindsight bias tricked him into believing the signs were more evident than they had been. Story 4. The failed business pitch. Now Sally, she worked tirelessly on her business pitch, certain that the company would invest in her idea. After the pitch, the investors declined, and they pointed out the flaws that she hadn't considered. Sally later told her partner, "I had a bad feeling they wouldn't go for it, because the writing was on the wall." Although Sally hadn't expressed any doubts before the meeting, hindsight bias made the rejection seem inevitable. She reconstructed her memories, believing she had anticipated the failure when in reality she was blindsided. Story 5. The election results. Tom had been following a local election closely, and while the race was tight, he expected his favoured candidate to win. However, the opponent pulled off an upset victory. After the results, Tom said, "I knew that the candidate was too popular to beat. It was obvious they'd win." Before the election, however, Tom had been unsure, yet the final result made him believe he had always anticipated the outcome. This hindsight bias made the result seem predictable, even though it hadn't been clear at the time. So these are just some examples of hindsight bias. But why? Why is hindsight bias dangerous? Hindsight bias is dangerous because it distorts our understanding of past events, leading us to believe outcomes were more predictable than they truly were. So this can cause an overconfidence in decision making, as we mistakenly think we knew it all along. In critical areas like finance, healthcare, or engineering, it may prevent people from learning from mistakes, as they overlook the actual uncertainties or risks involved. By believing outcomes are obvious, we fail to adequately prepare for future challenges, making us more vulnerable to repeating errors or facing unexpected setbacks. So does the educational system use hindsight bias? Yes, the educational system can inadvertently reinforce hindsight bias. especially in subjects like history or science, where outcomes are already known. Students are often taught events and discoveries as linear, inevitable progressions which can make the paths to these outcomes seem obvious in retrospect, retrospect being the operative word. But this approach overlooks the complexities, uncertainties, and alternative possibilities that existed at the time. As a result, students may undervalue the difficulty of decision making in uncertain conditions and fail to appreciate the importance of critical thinking and problem solving in ambiguous situations. This limits their ability to understand the real-world complexity of choices. So how can hindsight bias affect managers? Hindsight bias can hurt managers' decisions by making past outcomes seem more predictable than they actually were. This can lead to overconfidence in future decision making, as managers believe they saw it coming and underestimate uncertainty. And as a result, they may neglect thorough risk assessments, overlook alternative strategies, and fail to learn from mistakes. And hindsight bias can also distort performance evaluations, and this can cause managers to unfairly judge their team's past decisions without considering the information available at the time. And this can ultimately hinder growth, innovation, and effective problem solving. So let's talk about hindsight bias in world leaders. Now, hindsight bias can affect world leaders by making them believe past events, such as wars or economic crisis, were more predictable than they were. Again, this overconfidence, a recurring theme, can lead to poor decision making in future crises, as they may fail to recognize the complexities and uncertainties of new situations. They might rely on oversimplified lessons from history without fully assessing current risks. Additionally, hindsight bias can distort leaders' perceptions of their own and others' decisions and actions, leading to unfair blame or misplaced credit. This can affect diplomacy, policy decisions, and the ability to foster international cooperation. So how can we avoid hindsight bias? To avoid hindsight bias, we could consider focusing on documenting decisions and reasoning at the moment before outcomes are known, and therefore reflect on the uncertainties and alternatives that are present at the time. We could consider how things could have turned out differently to avoid thinking the result was inevitable. Encourage feedback and diverse perspectives to challenge your assumptions accordingly. We could also regularly revisit decisions with a fresh perspective, keeping in mind that hindsight bias can distort your memory of the process. So that's the end of the video. If you want to support the channel, like, subscribe, and watch the content. I repeat, if you want to support the channel, like, subscribe, and watch the content. Now, as some of you know, I have a social enterprise called Neuro Expression, which is about empowering neurodivergent people. If you want to know more about it, then consider downloading the free PDF called What is Dyspraxia from my website, and the link to that is in the description. And with that being said, I sincerely hope this video has provided value.